Can you all see my screen?
I can't yet. I have
Not yet.
And there it is.
Oh, got it.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we'll go. So welcome everyone to this show and tell. So we are making some great progress. We've got a lot of interesting things hopefully to talk about today. For those of you who haven't attended before, first of all, let's go through a couple of house rules so we can go on to the first slide, Marie. So the thing probably to highlight is, we're going to present and do some talking for the first part of this show and tell. We'll take some questions at the end. If you've got any questions as we go, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll come back to those at the end and hopefully we can cover all those off. For those of you who want to hear this in Welsh, we do have Nerys, who's providing the interpretation for us. I think hopefully, after, as we said, we're going to be recording this and we'll be looking to put this one out for those who can't attend at this time, hopefully onto YouTube, I believe it, later, as we have been doing with the previous show and tells. So let's have a look at the next slide. We can move on to that. So a slightly shorter show and tell this time. I think we're going to keep it short and sweet, but still plenty to say. We're going to talk a little bit about how, for those who are new, because we've broadened the audience for this show and tell, a little bit about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We'll talk about what we've done over the first 2 weeks of our alpha, and then we'll talk a little bit in detail about our technology survey, and probably kind of give a few asks for requests for help there to help us get that underway. And then at the end, we'll talk about what we're going to do next, highlight what we need from you, our colleagues in the public sector, and then take any questions, as we were saying earlier. So if we can now move on to the next slide, and a little bit, I guess, about CDPS itself. So we're a relatively new organisation, started in June 2020. We're working across the public sector in Wales, designing and delivering services around the needs of the people who will use them. We're an arm's length body of Welsh Government, and we report quarterly to the Ministerial Digital Board of Welsh Government. We're hopefully bringing Welsh public service professionals and digital transformation experts together, and we're looking to provide guidance, training, standards, and hands-on practical help to those we're working with. We'll move on to the next slide. What is the landscape review about? What's our project goal? See it up there. But really, we're trying to understand a broad view of where different organisations across Wales are in their digital journey, understanding what is important, and then understanding the best ways that CDPS can work with that wider public sector. A little bit about the team then on the next slide. So some of you who talked to us already, hopefully recognise some of those faces. So we have Henry, who's our Senior Product Manager, Suraj and Marie, who work as our business analysts and researchers, and myself, who's the Delivery Manager, ably supported by the second row of faces there from within CDPS and our partners, the PSC, who are working with us. So if we can come to the next slide, looking at what is it in particular we need to get from our alpha phase. So we've completed our first discovery phase, 12 weeks, we're now into the alpha phase, which is stage 2. What are we looking to do? We're looking to get evidence from a representative range of Welsh public services to help us support effective prioritisation of any of the opportunities we identified in that first phase. And what we'll have at the end of this is a costed roadmap of things that we can then go and do, which will hopefully make a big difference. So hopefully at that point I've identified where we can best focus in and provide benefit from our CDPS. We can move on to the next slide. I think at this point, we're over to Marie.
Thanks, Rick. So just a bit of context on how we're going about achieving that goal in this phase. So we are collecting evidence by speaking to a number of different people. So we're having a lot of really interesting conversations at organization level. And I know that we've had conversations with a number of you here. So thank you for your engagement so far. We've been talking about the breadth of services that an organization delivers and their approach to technology, as well as challenges and opportunities. From those conversations, we're then hoping to sample a small number of service owners and have a more detailed conversation in focus groups about how the service and how specific services are run and what tech they use. In the background, we're also continuing to develop our opportunities and intervention, and we're using the evidence that we're collecting to come to a prioritized short list of opportunities to take forward. We are now in sprint 15 out of 20, so almost halfway through our alpha phase. In a moment, you'll hear a bit more about what we've done in the last 2 weeks, and then at the end of our presentation, we'll talk about next steps for the next 2 sprints. I'll now hand over to Suraj to tell us a bit more about who we spoke to in the last 2 weeks.
Thanks, Marie. So over the last 2 weeks, we've spoken with 7 Welsh Government divisions and then also 6 arm's length bodies, all on the screen for you now. And essentially those conversations have been around the kind of both digital and non-digital services that those organisations have as part of their teams. Next slide, please. So those discussions have been really great. We've learned loads about the different types of services that have been offered, as well as also starting to learn a little bit more about the technology that's being used within those services. We've also started to establish kind of service lead contacts so that we can, start our next phase around approaching those individual services themselves. I think one thing that would be really great over the next kind of couple of weeks would really appreciate kind of any help that we can get in getting in touch with people across the different organisations, but specifically also with regards to health and care and local government. And later in this presentation, you'll get a little bit more information about how you can get involved. I'll now hand over to Henry.
Thank you, Suraj. So I then just have a few slides, just playing back some of the things that we've heard in this kind of breadth of service conversations. So those conversations with leaders across those Welsh Government divisions and those different sponsored bodies, again, of which a few of you I see are in the room. So again, thank you very much for discussing that with us. So a couple of themes have continued to come out, I think, echoing some of the things that we found in the discovery where we were just speaking to particular service owners in deep dives. Again, we're continuing to hear about a really key challenge of skills and people. And in fact, I think in many of the conversations we've had, this is the first challenge that people put forward. A couple of the quotes that we have here. So a particular leader talked about how there is a real reliance on individuals, and actually in one case study talked about how a particular digital service had to be paused and how it had previously been delivered internally and actually temporarily moved to being delivered through an external partner due to losing a particular individual who had developed a particularly strong skill set, really covering what we might expect to be 3 roles. So as that person moved on, finding it very difficult to bring in that kind of special person who is able to cover all of those things. So we're seeing there that kind of reliance on individuals. I think other organizations we've heard talk about the challenge of recruiting, particularly the challenge of matching the market rate for some specific digital roles. And then other things we've seen a call for lacking particularly agile skills and program managers, and particularly finding the time to protect that. This is an area, so then thinking about what we do about that or how we can help. CDPS already, through the head of skills, is working on a talent pipeline and a training academy. And we're finding it really helpful to keep gathering the evidence of what the challenges there and who potentially we could work with in the future. We're also thinking about an alternative to helping with these kind of challenges is, could we develop further central teams that could help provide or could help fill those gaps in either on a temporary basis or maybe via a project approach. And that's the kind of thing we're thinking about. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So then in terms of opportunities, I think we just want to call out that for all of the leaders that we've spoken to, they've all got some, we have heard some fantastic ideas for shared platforms and where organizations are keen to come together and work more closely. For example, we've heard about someone asking us for a plea for digitization of grant services. And actually also across the organization we've spoken to, we have seen that many are have a grant delivering approach. And there is a range of how those have been digitized, and many of them have been rapidly digitized during the COVID pandemic. So it seems like there's something there about could we come together and create one really fantastic grant delivering platform. Someone else pointed out how many organizations are delivering geographic based consultations. So they're asking, so if you lived in a particular area of Swansea, for example, there's a question of could there be a single portal where you could go and see all of the different organizations that are consulting on something relevant to you in that area. And that also seemed like a really interesting idea to explore. This quote here is a little bit different on the question of we need collective action on the part of Wales. And this was pointing out that in some areas where there is close working with the UK government, there are some different priorities that we see in terms of policy from the UK and from Wales, particularly, for example, around the wellbeing goals for Wales and the Future Generations Act. And there was a question in that particular area about whether Wales needs to take a particular ownership there in order to ensure that the platforms that are delivered are in line with those Wales specific priorities. And that's something we'd like to look at a bit more. At the bottom, this is a point about communities of practice, and particularly a suggestion that actually maybe we could work more closely with organizations working on data mapping, which again there's actually many of the organizations we've seen are running particular services where they're plotting things. And we know there's some fantastic things happening in Welsh Government, for example, with Data Map Wales. There's a question about could we bring those people together more to learn from each other. And then finally, a little bit different on joining up services, but one organization talked about how they're really keen to be able to use their specialist, really talented digital people to focus on their own services that are really making a difference for their users. And one way they could do that is looking at shared platforms for HR finance, and they were keen to look into that. So that's something we're thinking about. So all of these quotes, I think, really map back to two high-level opportunities that we talked about in the discovery. So particularly developing shared platforms and components, but also thinking about more of those kind of people-based opportunities around, for example, communities of practice. Can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. So this is just showing back, this is the definition of a service that we have been using through the review. We thought just an interesting observation from these first set of conversations about the breadth of services that organizations deliver is just how different organizations respond to this definition. I think, so all leaders that we've spoken to recognize this as a solid definition of a service, but we found it interesting how different organizations view the things that they're doing against this definition. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So here are just some quotes about how organizations are defining their services. We've definitely seen some variation in, for example, someone said that their interactions can be very informal, where there is no explicit goal for the user. And that's maybe organizations where they might think about physical space and people coming and potentially finding out about it rather than coming in with a really clear goal that they want to come away with. And I thought that was something quite interesting to think about. We also had a few debates about whether information providing services or guidance services would be thought of in this way, whether it's helpful to think about in this way. And that's something we did like to explore a bit more. We've also seen how the way that organizations plan and deliver their services internally maybe has an impact on how we think about the users. So for example, a particular organization where they had combined all of the delivery of their digital services into one platform, and they then found that maybe that kind of goal-led, user-centered view maybe was more difficult to apply to what they did. In terms of what we've done with this, very practically for the review, we're making much more of an effort to be clear about what services we see as in scope for the review, and clarifying that. So I think it's what matches that definition on the previous slide is the things that we want to hear about. and being upfront that we don't expect that all of the things that an organization does necessarily meet that view. We're not trying to define everything as a service, but we're finding that all organizations we speak to are running many services in line with that, that we think we can work with. Again, I think some of these conversations highlight that there are opportunities to use that kind of user-centered approach, even in the services which are not digital and which maybe shouldn't be digital. We still think there are some opportunities to think about what people are getting from those services and how we can best help them. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Marie? Thank you. And then this is the final one for me. This is just a slide on approaches to technology. I think the thing that we're drawing out here is just that the range, even within similar kinds of organizations, or in the case of Welsh Government, even within one organization, how many different ways of delivering the actual physical technology underneath these services. So if we look at Welsh Government, we see that we've seen a range from some divisions where they're mostly reliant on the central gov.wales team for most of their technology, but they do still have specific skills in producing data models within their division. We then have other divisions where their directorate has combined their technology resource and is doing a lot of that within that directorate themselves rather than through the gov.wales team. And then we see other areas where microsites are run, which is separate from the gov.wales team and are run by a separate internal technology team. Then when we look at sponsored bodies, there's even more of a range where we've met with some sponsored bodies where all of their technology is managed by a different sponsored body again, and then some of their individual services are delivered through managed contracts with external companies. We've then seen other organizations which have distinct internal digital and technology teams, and they're delivering their own services. And then at the other end, we've met with some sponsored bodies who are running their own data centers, hosting services for other organizations themselves, but still contracting out some services where that's found to be appropriate. So we see really quite a range in terms of how that technology resource is managed. I think with that, I'm passing back to Rick to talk about technology survey.
Rick, you're muted. Sorry.
As I was saying, I'm on mute. So there's a good link there between what Henry's just saying and the idea of the technology survey. So we have run initially in the discovery stage a technology survey as well. We didn't get a huge amount of responses. So really we've revamped that survey and we have a slightly different approach to it now. Most of the information that Henry was just talking about on the previous slide was taken at quite a high level of the organization. In our next conversations, we're going down talking to a lot of people who are actually more actively involved in running these services, and with it we will be seeking to get responses to this online survey that we've built, which asks a lot of more detailed questions around how technology is built, or whether it's bought, and then how it's run. It also asks some specific questions about the types of systems and maybe the devices that are used, perhaps your laptops and mobile phones and so on within the organization, or which are used to access the services as well. So it's quite a short survey. It's only taking 15 to 20 minutes. We know we've got some initial responses from the people we've talked to already, but we'll definitely be putting that out more widely. And there's also an opportunity there to get involved for those who'd like to. Perhaps we're not from organizations we're not talking to directly and having deep dives with, but definitely open to have anyone come in and give us the view of what technology looks like within their organization or their service. And there's a point, if we move on to the next couple of slides, where if we talk about what we're doing next, we are continuing to meet with the organization leads at that organizational level, as we're talking about, so high level conversations with director and sort of deputy director levels and chief executive officers of sponsor bodies and so on. But we are also going down to the next level of detail, setting up and hosting some focus groups, bringing some people together to have a much more detailed conversation to really give us get that in-depth information about how that representative sample are really running. So that will be really good to see over the next couple of weeks. We are also looking in parallel with this, developing some thoughts around how CDPS can then take the information we're gathering and potentially turn that into that costed roadmap. So that is progressing, and we'll hopefully be sharing some information around that in a future show and tell to kind of start to map out some of those ideas that we've got there. Highlight again, our next show and tell is in 2 weeks' time on the 29th of October, and we'll be able to share more about those things that we're talking about there at that point. If we can just go on to the next slide. So going back again to the point about the technology survey, but really anything, do get in contact with us at that email address there. Do put us in contact if you can with your tech leads if you haven't done so already, or even that, you know, we understand absolutely that, as Henry was saying, people are working with technology in a different way. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the person who has the job title head of IT or head of digital. It could be the person who is perhaps just closer to that problem, has the information. It'd be really good to talk to them. Encourage your teams if you can. You're in the position to join our focus group, the next step we were talking about. But we have to say, so far, you know, the response we've had overall has been excellent. We've had some fascinating conversations, and our diary is filling up with people to talk to, which is really great to see. And that brings us to the end. A couple of questions we have in the chat bar, which we'll go through first. So Glyn, do you want to come in and speak on this? You're asking about, can we make the links as we go along? I think the short answer there is yes. But is there anything else you'd like to highlight around that?
No, not really. Thanks for the update as ever. It's really helpful. It just struck me, you know, let's not have those comments really helpful. But if we can, you know, act on those comments because we have a platform already, then let's try and use it. So, you know, the mapping side is just an example. If there are other areas, just try to be bit careful, because we want to come to a solution but before the end of the landscape review on particular things. You know, we may, if we join up some organizations, let's make sure we're joining them up for a good purpose. And I think on the mapping side, we're certainly seeing that as a common platform. Everybody's frozen for me, so I don't know if you can hear me still.
No, you're still there. We can still hear you. That's
yeah. So that was everything. So Henry's answer was great. Yeah, I think just if we can, obviously you can't tell us in a show and tell who those bodies are, but you're the people behind the scenes who can make those links.
Absolutely. Where there's obvious things that we can do early, we won't wait and sit on our hands until the end of the review to it. And then I think, yeah, Henry's answered that one. So do we have any more questions? Very happy to answer questions at this point. And there's a deathly silence at that point. So I'm going to suggest if anyone kind of gets to the end of this call and then thinks, oh, why didn't I ask that? The email address kind of we had there, the Digital Landscape Review email address is, we can answer questions via that. Many of you will have talked to us already, or perhaps know Sally, or others within CDPS. Feel free to channel questions through those as well. Again, we'll be kind of putting the recording of this onto YouTube, so feel free to circulate with your colleagues, for perhaps those who you feel might be interested, or anyone you know who might be interested. Be very happy to receive kind of further questions in future. And I think that brings us to the end. So thank you all, and thank you, team.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.